My name is Valeria Mark, and I am 22 years old. 3 days ago, my parents drained my entire $80,000 college fund and handed it to my brother's girlfriend as a gift. When I confronted them, my father looked me dead in the eye and said, "You are smart. You will figure it out." I did not argue. I did not scream. I just turned around, walked out of their pristine suburban house, and picked up the phone to call my grandfather. 72 hours later, every single joint account, credit line, and asset my parents owned was frozen by a federal judge. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my family's financial life, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Sophia Told Stories. But only do it if this story resonates with you. Drop your age, your location, and your local time in the comments below. I want to know who is listening and where you are right now. Now let me take you back to a rainy Tuesday night in my cramped studio apartment. I was sitting at a wobbly desk balancing my laptop on my knees. The radiator in the corner was hissing, and a stack of legal briefs sat waiting for me on the floor. I work full-time as a paralegal, spending 50 hours a week filing motions and organizing exhibits just to make rent while I prepare for my first year of law school. Tuition is steep, but I had a safety net, an $80,000 custodial account that was supposed to guarantee my future. I logged into the university student portal to pay my first semester tuition. I typed in the routing numbers, took a deep breath, and hit submit. The screen buffered for 3 agonizing seconds. Then, a red error bar flashed across the top. Transaction declined. 0 balance. My stomach dropped. I refreshed the page. The same red text glared back at me. I opened my banking app, my fingers shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone. Available balance, $0.00. The ledger showed a single outbound wire transfer initiated at 9 a.m. that morning. The authorized signer was Richard Mark, my father. I did not even put on a coat. I grabbed my keys and drove 20 minutes through the rain to my parents' house. They live in a picture-perfect colonial home. Manicured lawn, fresh paint, the kind of place that screams upper-middle-class stability. Their driveway usually held my brother's luxury SUV, but tonight it was empty. I parked my 10-year-old sedan on the street, unlocked the side door, and walked inside. I found them in the kitchen. My mother, Susan, was leaning against the marble island, swirling a glass of Pinot Noir. My father stood next to her, casually sorting through the mail. The smell of roasted garlic and rosemary hung in the warm air. It looked like a magazine cover of domestic bliss. "Where is it?" I asked. My voice was eerily calm. My father looked up, adjusting his glasses. He did not look surprised. He did not look guilty. "Hello to you too, Valeria." "The tuition account," I said, stepping closer to the island. "It is empty. Where did the money go?" My mother sighed and set her wine glass down. "Valeria, lower your voice. The neighbors have their windows open." I stared at her. "I do not care about the neighbors, Mom. I care about my law school tuition being wired out of my account this morning." My father tossed a catalog onto the counter and folded his arms. "It did not go anywhere, sweetheart. We just reallocated it." Reallocated it. The sterile corporate buzzword felt like a slap to the face. "Jason needed it," my mother chimed in. Her tone dripped with the kind of practiced patience you use on a toddler. Jason is my 26-year-old brother, the son who took 6 years to finish community college, who currently consults for tech startups that never seem to actually launch. Jason needed $80,000 today, I asked, my nails digging into my palms. Brittany needed it, my father corrected, as if that somehow made it better. Brittany is Jason's girlfriend of 8 months. She owns a ring light, a toy dog, and an Instagram account with 10,000 followers. She is launching a lifestyle brand, my father continued. Plus, they are looking at a townhouse in the city. They needed capital for the down payment and the business incorporation. The market is very competitive right now. I stopped breathing for a second. "You gave my tuition money to your son's girlfriend so she can play influencer. It is an investment in your brother's future," my mother said, her jaw tightening. "Jason has to keep Brittany happy. She expects a certain standard of living, and your brother is under a lot of pressure to provide." You know how he gets when he's stressed. And what about my future? The question slipped out before I could stop it. My father offered a thin, dismissive smile. You are smart, Val. You are already working at a law firm. You will figure it out. Take out some student loans. Fill out the financial aid forms. You have the grit for it. Jason doesn't. He said it with such casual finality. He was not just taking my money. He was penalizing me for my own competence. Because I could survive the hardship, I was expected to endure it. Because Jason could not handle adversity, he was shielded from it at my expense. That was not your money to give, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. I am the custodian on the account, my father replied, turning his back to open the refrigerator. That makes it my discretion. Now, if you are going to cause a scene, I'm going to ask you to leave. We have reservations at the club at 8. I looked at my mother, who had already picked her wine glass back up, staring pointedly out the window to avoid my gaze. The betrayal was so sharp, it left a metallic taste in my mouth. They had made their choice. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just turned on my heel and walked out the door, the click of the deadbolt echoing behind me. I drove back to my apartment with the heater broken and the windshield wipers scraping a frantic rhythm against the glass. Every street lamp reflecting in the dark puddles reminded me of the stark difference between my brother and me. Jason was the firstborn son. In my parents' eyes, he was the heir apparent, even though he had nothing to inherit and nothing to offer the world. I remembered a morning 2 winters ago that perfectly encapsulated our family dynamic. It was sleeting sideways. I was standing at the concrete transit stop, wrapped in a cheap wool coat, waiting for the 6 a.m. public bus to take me to the law firm. I was working 40 hours a week just to pay for my undergraduate textbooks and my rent. My hands were numb and my shoes were soaked through. As the bus pulled up, my mother sent a photo to the family group chat. It was Jason, standing in their wide driveway, holding the keys to a pristine white luxury SUV. A giant red velvet bow was stuck to the hood. The caption below the photo read, "So proud of our boy for finishing his degree." It took Jason 6 years to get a 2-year associate degree from a local community college. He failed basic algebra 3 times. He dropped classes whenever the professors expected him to actually show up. His reward for scraping by with a C average was a $50,000 car paid in cash. My reward for making the dean's list every single semester was a generic text saying, "Keep up the good work." I was the reliable one, the invisible one, the child who required 0 maintenance and therefore received 0 attention. The sun came up the next morning, gray and unforgiving. I had not slept a single minute. I was sitting on my thrifted sofa, staring at the blank wall, when a sharp, confident knock rattled my front door. I looked through the peephole. It was my father. He wore his tailored golf slacks and a crisp navy polo shirt. Tucked under his arm was a thick, beige manila folder. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. He looked around my tiny living space, his nose crinkling slightly at the lingering smell of my cheap coffee and the scuffed baseboards. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not offer an apology for the night before. He just dropped the folder onto my small dining table and pulled out a heavy silver pen. "I need you to sign these, Val," he said, tapping the paper with a manicured fingernail. I walked over and looked down. It was a stack of official IRS documents. Form 709, United States Gift and Generation Skipping Transfer Tax Return. I read the bold print at the top and felt my stomach twist into a tight, cold knot. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my distance from the table. "It is just a formality," my father said, waving his hand as if swatting away a minor annoyance. "Since the tuition account was technically in your name under my custodianship," the accountant says, "moving $80,000 to Brittany triggers a federal tax audit flag. We need to reclassify the transfer. We need to make it look like a retroactive gift from you to her. It exempts me from paying the penalty tax on the wire transfer. You want me to tell the federal government that I willingly gifted my entire law school fund to a woman I have met exactly 3 times? I asked. My voice sounded hollow, echoing in the small kitchen. Before he could formulate an excuse, my phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with a message from an unsaved number. I picked it up. It was a photo from Brittany. The image showed her manicured hand resting on the leather steering wheel of Jason's SUV. Stacked on her wrist were 2 gleaming gold Cartier love bracelets. The caption below the photo read, "Hubby spoiled me to celebrate the new business launch. Need a huge favor, babe. Since you are so good at computer stuff, can you design my brand logo for free? I want something minimalist but expensive looking. Let me know." I stared at the glowing screen. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Those bracelets retailed for over $7,000 each. $15,000 of my stolen tuition money was currently sitting on the wrist of an unemployed, aspiring influencer, and she had the nerve to ask me for free graphic design work. She called my brother hubby, even though they had been dating for less than a year. She treated me like the hired help. I set the phone face down on the counter. I looked at the complicated tax forms and then looked at the man who was demanding I commit tax fraud to protect his bank account. "No," I said. My father paused. He looked at me as if I had just spoken a word in a language he did not comprehend. "Excuse me," he said. "I am not signing anything," I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. "You took my money. You can pay the taxes on it. I will not sign my name to a lie." The nice suburban dad mask slipped right off his face. His posture straightened, and his eyes hardened into cold flint. "You listen to me, Valeria," he said, his voice dropping to a low, threatening register. "You are going to sign this paper today. You are going to play ball and support your brother. If you decide to throw a tantrum over this, I will call human resources at my company and drop you from my health insurance plan by noon. I will call your aunts and your uncles and let them know how ungrateful and bitter you are. I will tell them you are having a mental breakdown. You will be dead to this extended family. Do you understand me?" The threat hung in the stale air of my apartment. He expected me to cave. I had always caved. For 22 years, I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. I had accepted the crumbs while Jason feasted at the table. I realized in that exact moment that I was not a daughter to them. I was a resource. I was a financial organ donor, kept alive merely to harvest parts to keep the golden child comfortable. They did not love me. They only loved what my silent compliance afforded them. I looked at his expensive silver pen resting on the fraudulent tax return. I looked at his rigid jaw and his furious eyes. "Get out of my apartment," I said. He grabbed his pen, his face flushed with dark indignation. "You will regret this, Val," he spat. "You are making a huge mistake." He marched out into the hallway and slammed the door behind him so hard the cheap picture frames on my wall rattled against the drywall. I threw the deadbolt and leaned against the wood. I was entirely alone. My parents had abandoned me. My brother was busy spending my future on designer jewelry for a stranger. But as the silence settled over the room, I realized my father was wrong. He was the one who had made the mistake. In his arrogance and his rush to secure my signature, he had brought the full custodial paperwork to prove the account transfer to the IRS. He had left a copy of the original ledger tucked beneath the tax forms on my table. I walked over and picked up the thick stack of documents. I flipped past the signature pages and read the fine print detailing the original source of the funds. My parents had not seeded that account. They did not put a single dime into my college fund. They were only the assigned managers. I dropped the papers on the table and walked into my bedroom. I dropped to my knees and reached under my bed, pulling out a dusty shoebox filled with old keepsakes. Inside, buried under high school report cards and faded photographs, was an old birthday card. It contained a crisp $100 bill and a phone number written in sharp cursive ink. It was from the one man my father feared more than the federal government. I stared down at the crisp $100 bill inside the faded birthday card. The paper smelled like cedar and old ink. The handwriting was sharp and angular, leaning heavily to the right. It read, "Happy 18th birthday, Valeria. Use this for something your father cannot repossess." Below the signature was a 10-digit phone number. Harrison Mark was my grandfather. He was a formidable man who built a commercial real estate empire out of a single mortgaged storefront in the 1970s. He possessed the kind of quiet, generational wealth that did not require luxury SUVs or country club memberships to prove it existed. I had not seen him in nearly a decade. 10 years ago, my father Richard tried to leverage my grandfather's business assets to fund a disastrous tech startup venture. When Harrison refused, my father threw a spectacular tantrum, accusing the old man of hoarding wealth. Harrison responded by cutting Richard off without a single cent. My parents spent the next 10 years painting my grandfather as a paranoid miser who hated his own blood. I sat on my bedroom floor tracing the numbers on the card. My father had just threatened to erase me from the family if I did not help him cover up his theft. He thought I had no allies. He thought I was trapped in this tiny apartment with no resources and no leverage. I picked up my phone and dialed the 10 digits. The line rang twice. A deep, gravelly voice answered. Mark speaking. I swallowed the dry lump in my throat. "Grandpa," I said, "it is Valeria." There was a brief silence on the other end, a thick, heavy pause where I could hear the faint sound of city traffic through his window. "Valeria?" he said. His tone was cautious, but not unkind. "It has been a long time. Are you safe?" "I am safe," I replied, my voice steadying, but Dad drained the education account. The silence that followed was different. It was the sharp, sudden stillness of a predator catching a scent. "How much?" he asked. $80,000, I said. He wired it out yesterday morning. He gave it to Jason's girlfriend for a business launch. He just brought IRS forms to my apartment demanding I sign them to categorize the transfer as a retroactive gift from me. I heard the sound of a leather chair creaking. "Bring those forms to my office," he commanded. "Do not sign a single page. Do not text your father. Be here in 1 hour." He gave me an address in the financial district and hung up. I gathered the tax documents my father had left behind, along with the bank ledger printed from my student portal. I shoved them into my leather tote bag and ran out the door. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained a bruised, heavy gray. I drove into the city, my mind racing through the potential outcomes of this meeting. I was stepping outside the established hierarchy of my family. For my entire life, I had been conditioned to keep secrets inside the house. Calling Harrison was an act of high treason. The address belonged to a sleek glass and steel skyscraper overlooking the harbor. I rode the silent elevator to the 42nd floor. The reception area was vast and minimalist, featuring dark slate floors and a single receptionist who immediately guided me into a corner office. Harrison Mark stood by a floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the sprawling city. He was 78 years old, but he stood with the rigid posture of a military general. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car. He turned around as I entered. His eyes were the same piercing shade of blue as my father's, but they held none of the arrogance. They held only sharp, calculating intelligence. "Sit down, Valeria," he said, pointing to a leather chair across from his wide mahogany desk. A steaming cup of black coffee waited for me on a silver coaster. I sat down and pulled the crumpled IRS tax forms and the bank ledger from my tote bag. I slid them across the polished wood. Harrison put on a pair of silver reading glasses and picked up the papers. I watched his face closely. He did not gasp. He did not yell. But as his eyes scanned the federal forms and the routing numbers on the wire transfer, a terrifying stillness overtook him. The knuckles on his right hand turned white as he gripped the edge of the desk. The paper trembled slightly in his grasp, betraying a cold, calculated fury. "Your father is a fool," Harrison said, his voice barely above a whisper. He always was a creature of pathetic impulses. But this is a new level of stupidity. He said he was the custodian, I explained, wrapping my cold hands around the hot coffee mug. He said the money was at his discretion. He told me to just take out student loans because Jason needed to keep Brittany happy. Harrison lowered his glasses and looked at me. His gaze was intense, stripping away years of my parents' gaslighting in a single second. "Valeria," he said, "did Richard ever tell you where that $80,000 came from?" I shook my head. I assumed it was a standard college savings plan, something they set up when I was born. Harrison let out a short, bitter laugh. "Your parents have not saved a dime in 20 years. They lease their cars. They refinance their mortgage to pay for country club dinners. That $80,000 did not belong to them. It came from me." I stared at him, stunned. "You funded my tuition. When you were 12 years old, I saw the writing on the wall," Harrison explained, leaning forward. "I saw how Richard coddled your brother and ignored your potential. I knew that when the time came to pay for your education, the well would be dry. So I seeded an account for you. But it was not a simple savings account. I set it up as an irrevocable trust. I was a paralegal. I spent my days reading legal definitions. The word irrevocable echoed in my mind, carrying a crushing legal weight. Because you were a minor, Richard was listed as the fiduciary custodian. Harrison continued, his voice hardening into steel. His only legal authority was to disperse those funds directly to an educational institution on your behalf. He did not own that money. He was merely holding it in trust for you. I looked down at the fraudulent tax form sitting on the desk. So when he wired it to Brittany, when he wired those funds to a third party for personal use, he breached his fiduciary duty, Harrison said, finishing my sentence. By moving the money across state lines to a corporate entity, he committed federal wire fraud. And by trying to force you to sign a retroactive gift exemption, he is attempting to falsify federal tax documents to cover up embezzlement. The air in the office felt very thin. My father had not just stolen from a college student. He had stolen from an irrevocable trust established by a ruthless real estate mogul, and he had left a perfect paper trail of federal crimes in his wake. He threatened to cut me off from the extended family if I did not help him, I whispered, staring at the coffee in my cup. He said he would take me off the health insurance and ruin my reputation. Harrison stood up and walked around the desk. He placed a heavy, reassuring hand on my shoulder. The warmth of that single gesture almost brought tears to my eyes. It was the most parental affection I had felt in years. "We do not cry over stolen money, Valeria," he said, his voice echoing with grim finality. "We take it back with interest." He walked over to his sleek desk phone and hit a speed dial button. A woman answered immediately. "Get my forensic accountant and the senior litigation team in here right now," Harrison ordered. "Cancel my afternoon meetings. We have a thief to catch." I sat in that leather chair, feeling the fundamental reality of my life shift. My father thought I was a helpless variable he could manipulate to serve his favorite son. He had no idea that by forcing me into a corner, he had handed me the exact weapon I needed to dismantle his entire fake empire. The trap was about to be set, and nobody in my family saw it coming. The machinery of generational wealth moves with a silent, terrifying efficiency. I had spent my early 20s scraping together rent money, navigating the sluggish bureaucracy of student loan portals, and eating cheap noodles just to survive. Sitting in that towering skyscraper, I watched my grandfather orchestrate a legal strike force in under 20 minutes. 3 people entered the expansive corner office, moving with deliberate purpose. A forensic accountant carrying a heavy silver briefcase arrived first, followed by 2 corporate litigators who looked sharp enough to draw blood. They did not offer sympathetic smiles or hollow platitudes. They treated my stolen future as a tactical puzzle that required immediate and ruthless solving. Harrison gestured for me to hand over the paperwork. I slid the printed bank ledger and the fraudulent internal revenue forms across the polished mahogany surface. The accountant, a tall, austere man with piercing gray eyes, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and began examining the routing numbers. Within 10 minutes, he had his secure laptop open, projecting his digital findings onto a flat-screen monitor mounted on the far wall. The path of the stolen funds was undeniable and glaringly sloppy. My father believed he was exceptionally clever. He operated under the arrogant assumption that financial crimes committed within a family unit were immune to outside scrutiny. He thought blood ties acted as a shield against federal law. The projected graph proved otherwise. At 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning, Richard transferred the entire balance of the irrevocable trust directly into his primary personal checking account. He let the funds sit there for exactly 45 minutes, perhaps to simulate a buffer. Then he initiated a second outgoing wire, sending the full $80,000 to a newly registered limited liability company. The business entity was named Aura Wellness, LLC. The sole registered proprietor listed on the state incorporation documents was Brittany. It was an ironclad paper trail of profound fiduciary breach. To seal the trap permanently, Harrison leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Do you possess any written correspondence confirming the intent behind this theft?" he asked, his tone perfectly calibrated. I unlocked my smartphone and pulled up the family text thread. I exported the messages where my mother openly claimed the funds were an investment in my brother's future. I provided the digital screenshot of Brittany flexing her shiny new Cartier bracelets while demanding my free graphic design labor. Finally, I forwarded the vicious text message my father sent hours after he left my apartment, threatening to drop me from his health insurance policy if I refused to sign the retroactive tax documents. The lead litigator, a striking woman wearing a tailored silk blouse, read the texts in silence. A chilling, calculated smile formed on her lips. She looked up at Harrison and stated her assessment. "We have documented intent, a written confession, and digital proof of extortion. Your son left a trail so wide, a freight train could drive through it. This is a federal prosecutor's dream scenario. We can file the injunction by tomorrow morning." By Wednesday morning, I was back at my own job. I sat at a chipped laminate desk in the crowded bullpen of a midtown law firm, formatting deposition exhibits for strangers. My dual monitors glowed with mundane civil disputes, while my mind constantly replayed the monumental events unfolding downtown. I was actively building a criminal prosecution case against my own blood relatives. A brief, sudden wave of guilt washed over me, making my chest feel tight. I pictured my parents' pristine colonial house with its manicured lawn and slate shutters. I wondered if sending federal subpoenas would shatter the only foundation I had ever known. Was I overreacting to a bad situation? Was I destroying my family over a stack of cash? Then I closed my eyes and remembered the freezing sleet hitting my face at the concrete transit stop. I pictured Jason standing in the driveway holding the keys to his luxury vehicle while I mentally calculated how many meals I could skip to afford my undergraduate textbooks. I envisioned the glittering gold jewelry wrapped around the delicate wrist of an aspiring social media influencer paid for by my stolen education. The guilt evaporated instantly. It was replaced by a cold, clarifying resolve that settled deep in my bones. I was not destroying the family. The family had destroyed itself the very moment they decided my future was acceptable collateral damage for Jason's unearned comfort. I went back to typing my legal briefs, feeling more focused and dangerous than I ever had in my entire life. The victim mentality shed like dead skin. At noon, my cell phone vibrated on the desk. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let the device ring 3 times before sliding my finger across the glass screen. "Hello, Mom," I answered, keeping my breathing slow and measured. Her voice was light, breezy, and dripping with artificial warmth. "Val, honey," she cooed, her tone implying nothing was wrong in the world. "I am calling to see if you are free for dinner on Friday night. Your father and I are taking Jason and Brittany to the Prime Steakhouse downtown to celebrate the new wellness brand launch. We want you to come join us." We can smooth things over and put this silly little argument behind us." She genuinely assumed I had accepted defeat. She truly believed that after 48 hours of the silent treatment, I would fold and crawl back to the familial dinner table. She thought a free steak dinner would buy my forgiveness and secure my signature on those fraudulent tax forms. She expected me to swallow my pride and smile at the woman wearing my tuition on her wrist. I kept my tone perfectly even. I matched her breezy cadence, refusing to give her a single hint of the storm gathering just off the coast. "That sounds lovely, Mom, but I have to work late on Friday evening. I have a daunting stack of case files to organize for the senior partners." "Oh, well, your father will be quite disappointed," she sighed, sounding anything but upset. "We will just have to celebrate without you. Do not work too hard, Val. Maybe you can design Brittany's logo this weekend instead." "I will see what I can do," I replied politely before ending the call. I set the phone down on my desk, listening to the hum of the office air conditioner. She had no idea how hard I was working. She had no concept of what kind of case files were currently being prepared in a glass skyscraper across town. The trap was primed, loaded, and waiting for them to step onto the pressure plate. If you discovered your parents committed federal fraud against you, would you report them or let it slide to keep the peace? Tell me your answer in the comments, because what I did next changed my family forever. Friday evening arrived with a crisp autumn chill. At 8 o'clock, I was sitting on my second-hand sofa wrapped in a fleece blanket. Rain tapped softly against the single window of my apartment. I poured hot water over an Earl Grey tea bag and opened a thick textbook for my upcoming classes. Across town, my family was walking into the most exclusive dining establishment in the city, the kind of steakhouse where reservations require months of waiting, and the waitstaff wear tailored white jackets. I could picture the scene with vivid clarity. My father handing his expensive trench coat to the host, my mother checking her reflection in the mirrored lobby walls, ensuring her pearls sat perfectly. Jason and Brittany trailing behind, pretending they naturally belonged among the city elite. They were celebrating Brittany's new lifestyle brand. They were toasting to a business venture entirely funded by my stolen tuition money. I imagined them ordering imported wine and premium cuts of beef, laughing without a single thought spared for the daughter they had discarded. But at 45 minutes past the hour, my phone screen illuminated the dark room. A photo of my mother flashed on the caller ID. I muted the device and turned a page in my textbook. 2 minutes later, the screen lit up again. This time, it was my father. Then Jason called. Then my mother twice more. By 9 o'clock, I stared at 15 missed calls and 7 unread text messages. I did not feel an ounce of anxiety. The familiar dread that usually accompanied their demands had vanished entirely. I picked up the smartphone and navigated to the voicemail inbox. I pressed play on the first audio recording. My mother's voice echoed through the small speaker. She was whispering, but the frantic edge in her tone was undeniable. "Valeria, pick up the phone right now," she hissed. "We are at the restaurant and your father's platinum card just declined." The waiter tried to run the chip twice. "The automated system is saying there is a security lock. Did you call the fraud department by mistake to complain about the tuition transfer? Call them back and clear this up immediately. Brittany is sitting right here, and this is humiliating." My father treated his primary credit card like a royal scepter. He loved the heavy metallic thud it made when he dropped it onto a leather check tray. He derived his entire sense of self-worth from his ability to buy compliance and project infinite wealth. To have a waiter return that card and ask for another form of payment in front of his golden son and an aspiring social media influencer was a fate worse than physical injury for a man like Richard Mark. I tapped the screen to play the next message. My mother's voice had risen an octave, abandoning all pretense of a hushed whisper. I could hear the clatter of silverware and the low murmur of other patrons in the background. "Valeria, what did you do?" she demanded. He tried a second card, and it declined. He tried the debit card, and it was rejected. The manager is standing at our table asking us to follow him to the back office. Jason offered to pay the $500 bill, but his card was denied too, because his account is linked to ours. You are ruining this evening. Fix this. They had no idea what kind of storm had made landfall on their financial portfolio. Harrison's corporate litigators did not just send a polite warning letter. They operated with ruthless efficiency. Earlier that afternoon, the lead attorney had called to explain the legal mechanics of our counterattack. The legal team filed an emergency ex parte injunction, citing the imminent flight risk of stolen fiduciary trust funds. A federal judge reviewed the wire transfer logs, the fraudulent tax documents, and the text messages I provided. The judge did not just pause the stolen $80,000. The court ordered a hard freeze on every single asset tied to Richard and Susan. Their joint checking accounts were locked. Their home equity line of credit was suspended. Their retirement portfolios were sealed pending a full investigation into the embezzlement. The financial guillotine had dropped, cutting off their lifeblood in an instant. The third audio file painted a picture of pure, unfiltered panic. They were no longer in the dining room. The acoustic echo suggested they were standing in a tiled hallway or a parking garage. Val, my father, spoke this time. His voice was ragged, stripped of its usual haughty resonance. The bank emergency line operator just told me there was a federal legal hold on my entire portfolio. They mentioned an injunction. What kind of lies did you tell the authorities? You need to call whoever you spoke to and tell them you made a mistake. We are stuck at the restaurant. I had to leave my vintage gold watch with the general manager as collateral, just so we could walk out the door. Answer your phone. I sat in the quiet comfort of my apartment, taking a slow sip of my tea. I did not reply to the messages. I did not block their numbers either. I simply pressed a button to export each audio file, saving them to a secure cloud drive. Every frantic demand and desperate excuse was a recorded admission of their guilt. They were openly confirming the disputed nature of the funds on tape. For 22 years, the family hierarchy had been painfully clear. They held all the resources, and I was expected to beg for scraps. They dictated my worth, my comfort, and my future. Now, sitting in my cheap apartment with a warm mug in my hands, I controlled the narrative. I held the keys to their survival. The Golden family was in free fall, tumbling through the dark without a parachute. The final recording arrived near 10 o'clock. It was my mother again. The background noise was the unmistakable hum of highway traffic. "Val, please," she begged. Her voice cracked, losing all its practiced elegance. We managed to get to a gas station, but the pump rejected the card. We do not even have enough fuel to drive back to the suburbs. I am terrified. We cannot buy gas. We cannot buy food. I do not understand what is happening. Please help us. She asked for help from the same daughter she had casually discarded 3 days prior. She expected me to rescue them from the consequences of their own theft. I set my phone face down on the table and let the quiet room envelop me. The scapegoat had finally taken control of the story. But the financial freeze did not just affect my parents' ability to buy premium steaks and gasoline. By freezing Richard's outgoing transfers, the court had also placed a temporary recall hold on the funds sent to Brittany's new corporate entity. The influencer lifestyle brand was built on stolen cash that was now flagged by federal investigators. Her new business checks were about to bounce. The luxury illusion was shattering rapidly, and Jason was about to find out exactly what his girlfriend truly valued when the money stopped flowing. The weekend passed in total silence from my parents. The federal hold functioned like a steel trap clamping down on their resources. By Monday morning, the ripple effects reached their intended target. The $80,000 meant for the influencer lifestyle brand never settled into the corporate account. The bank flagged the incoming wire due to the judicial injunction and reversed the transaction. Brittany grew up in a modest suburban neighborhood, but spent her adult life manufacturing an aura of effortless luxury. She leased designer handbags and maxed out personal credit cards to project wealth online. When she met Jason, she believed she had found an infinite automated teller machine. She signed a lease agreement for a high-end commercial studio on Saturday morning. By Sunday afternoon, the property manager called to inform her that her cashier check had bounced. The caterer she hired for her upcoming launch party demanded immediate cash payment. The illusion fractured instantly. Without the stolen funds smoothing over his deep flaws, Jason offered her nothing of value. The moment the financial tap ran dry, she turned her panic onto him. I learned all of this on Monday at 11 in the morning. I was standing near the polished marble reception desk of my law firm. I held a thick stack of finalized affidavits, waiting for a courier to arrive. The heavy glass revolving doors at the front entrance spun with frantic speed. Jason practically fell into the lobby. He looked nothing like the smug older brother who smirked at me during family holidays. The pristine country club facade had crumbled. He wore a wrinkled gray hoodie and denim jeans that looked slept in. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. His breath came in ragged, uneven gasps as his gaze darted around the quiet professional space. He spotted me standing by the mahogany desk. "Valeria!" he shouted. His voice echoed off the acoustic ceiling tiles, causing two senior partners to pause their conversation. He stormed across the lobby, closing the distance between us. "You have to fix this right now. You have to undo whatever you did." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I handed the affidavits to the receptionist and turned to face him. "Lower your voice, Jason," I said, my tone dropping to a calm, steady register. "You are in my place of work." He ignored my warning. He ran a shaking hand through his uncombed hair. "Brittany packed her bags," he stammered, his eyes wide with desperate panic. "She went to a hotel." The real estate broker called her a fraud. Her event planner quit. She told me if the corporate account is not unlocked by tomorrow morning, she is leaving me. She said I humiliated her. I stared at the 26-year-old man standing in front of me. For my entire life, my parents had treated him like a fragile genius who simply needed the right environment to thrive. They shielded him from every consequence and punished me whenever his comfort was threatened. I remembered when he quit the high school debate team after losing his first match. My parents bought him a new gaming console to cheer him up, while telling me I needed to study harder to make up for his academic shortcomings. Now facing his first genuine crisis, he possessed zero coping mechanisms. He was drowning in an inch of water. "It is not my job to fund your relationship," I replied softly. "If she is leaving you over a bounced check, she never loved you. She only loved the money Dad stole from my trust fund." His face twisted into a mask of pure indignation. "You are ruining my life," he yelled, taking another step forward. "You are doing this on purpose because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of us." A tall, broad-shouldered security guard named David stepped out from behind the reception counter. He placed himself firmly between Jason and me. "Is there a problem here?" Miss David asked, his hand resting casually near his utility belt. "He was just leaving," I said, maintaining direct eye contact with my brother. David nodded and placed a firm hand on Jason's shoulder. "Sir, it is time to go. Let us walk toward the exit." Jason tried to shrug off the heavy grip, but the guard easily guided him toward the revolving doors. My brother realized his intimidation tactics held no power in the real world. His anger dissolved back into pathetic desperation. "Val, please," he begged, twisting his neck to look at me as he was marched across the slate floor. "Call off Granddad. Just call Harrison and tell him it was a misunderstanding. I will pay you back eventually, I promise. Just give the money to Brittany so she comes home." I stood in the quiet lobby and watched the guard push him through the glass doors out onto the bustling city sidewalk. Jason stumbled slightly, adjusting his wrinkled hoodie, looking small and insignificant against the towering concrete buildings. I shook my head, knowing he could still see me through the glass. A profound sense of clarity washed over me. I felt no pity for him. The golden child was a hollow shell. He relied entirely on stolen resources to secure affection because he cultivated no actual character. Brittany was a mercenary who traded her presence for luxury goods, and Jason, only ever loved me when I remained silent and small. He valued my existence only when my resources could be harvested to pave his easy road. The illusion of our perfect family had shattered, leaving only the ugly, transactional reality exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights. I turned my back to the glass doors and walked toward the elevators, ready to return to my desk. I had real work to accomplish and a future to protect. My colleagues offered a few sympathetic glances, but I simply offered a polite smile and went back to formatting exhibits. I did not feel embarrassed by his public outburst. I felt liberated. The heavy chain of familial obligation had finally snapped. My brother had failed to intimidate me into submission. The financial freeze remained intact, crushing their lifestyle by the hour. But Richard and Susan were not accustomed to losing control. Since they could no longer access their bank accounts to buy their way out of trouble, they decided to use the only currency they had left. They weaponized their social standing. If they could not force me to unfreeze the trust fund, they would ensure my name became toxic to everyone we knew. The psychological warfare was about to begin. By Wednesday, my parents realized intimidation had failed. The bank accounts remained locked tight. The golden son had returned home empty-handed and abandoned by his aspiring influencer girlfriend. Bereft of financial leverage, Richard and Susan resorted to the only currency they had left in their arsenal. They turned to social capital. For decades, my mother cultivated a pristine image among our relatives. She hosted the elaborate holiday dinners. She organized the summer reunions. She controlled the family narrative, keeping the spotlight firmly fixed on Jason's fabricated achievements, while relegating my existence to the shadows. It started on a Thursday evening. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, then it chimed again. Within 3 minutes, a chorus of notifications flooded the screen. I opened my social media application and saw a lengthy status update posted by Susan Mark. It was tagged to 50 different relatives and close family friends. The post was a masterclass in psychological manipulation and manufactured victimhood. She wrote a tragic tale about a household torn apart by greed. According to her narrative, Jason was on the verge of a beautiful life milestone. He was building a promising business and preparing to propose to the love of his life. But his jealous younger sister could not stand seeing him happy. The post claimed I had secretly contacted our estranged grandfather. It alleged I manipulated a confused, declining elder into punishing my own parents over a simple financial misunderstanding. Susan painted herself as a heartbroken mother, praying for her misguided daughter to find peace. The group text messages followed shortly after. The extended relatives descended like vultures. My Aunt Barbara, my father's oldest sister, sent a direct message calling me a sociopath. She accused me of elder abuse and demanded I drop the legal injunction immediately. A cousin I had not spoken to in 4 years texted to say I was a disgrace to the Mark name. Another aunt left a blistering voicemail claiming I was tearing my mother apart. None of them asked for my side of the story. They did not inquire about the missing $80,000. They swallowed the fabricated narrative whole because it fit the established dynamic. Valeria was always the difficult one. Jason was always the innocent victim. It was easier for the extended family to believe I had lost my mind than to accept that Richard and Susan were common thieves. Sitting alone in my quiet apartment, the weight of their collective judgment pressed down on my chest. It is a profound, specific type of pain when your own blood relatives align against you based on a lie. A hot wave of indignation flushed my cheeks. My fingers trembled as I opened a blank message thread addressed to the entire family group. I began typing a furious defensive paragraph. I wanted to scream the truth through the digital ether. I wrote about the stolen education fund. I typed out the words irrevocable trust. I explained how Brittany demanded free labor while wearing my stolen tuition on her delicate wrist. I wanted to post the official bank ledgers. I wanted to expose my parents for the frauds they truly were. I wanted to tear down the pristine colonial facade and show everyone the rot hiding inside. My thumb hovered over the send button. My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt the desperate urge to clear my name. Then I stopped. I closed my eyes and took a deep, steadying breath. I remembered sitting in the sleek corner office overlooking the harbor just a few days prior. I recalled the quiet, formidable presence of Harrison. During our meeting, the seasoned real estate mogul had offered a vital piece of tactical wisdom. "Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake," he had said, his blue eyes sharp and calculating. "They will hang themselves if you provide enough rope." I looked down at the glowing screen. I read the angry, defensive text I had just poured my soul into. I highlighted the entire paragraph. I pressed delete. The cursor blinked steadily on a blank white screen. I put the smartphone down on the table and let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. My parents thought they were winning a public relations war. They believed shaming me into submission was a brilliant strategy. But they were operating on playground rules, while I was navigating a high-stakes corporate battlefield. Every single public post my mother published was time-stamped. Every toxic message my father sent to the extended family corroborating her lies was a documented piece of written correspondence. They were not destroying my reputation. They were manufacturing a pristine trail of legal evidence. They were publicly admitting to the financial dispute while attempting to extort a witness through social coercion. The legal team Harrison hired did not care about social media likes or sympathetic comments from Aunt Barbara. The forensic accountants and corporate litigators only cared about actionable harassment and documented slander. I spent the next 2 hours taking detailed screenshots of every post, every comment, and every private message. I captured the timestamps and the author names. I compiled them into a neat, organized digital folder. I composed a brief email to the lead litigator at my grandfather's firm, attaching the entire catalog of their orchestrated smear campaign. I added a simple subject line: "Further evidence of retaliation and harassment." Within 10 minutes, the lawyer replied with a single sentence: "This is excellent material, thank you. I did not block my aunts or my cousins. I let their notifications pile up on my lock screen, treating their vitriol as meaningless background noise." The desperate urge to defend myself vanished entirely. When you hold the winning hand, you do not need to brag about your cards. You just wait for the final reveal. My parents were exhausting themselves digging a spectacular hole in front of the entire extended family. They thought the social pressure would break my resolve. They had no idea their public tantrum was handing my legal team the exact ammunition needed to escalate the situation. By remaining silent, I denied them the dramatic argument they craved. They wanted a screaming match. They wanted me to look unstable and reactive to prove their narrative correct. My silence drove them to post more frequently, resulting in increasingly erratic and desperate claims. Susan began posting vague threats about taking legal action against me. Richard left comments claiming he had proof of my supposed mental instability. Each word they typed tightened the legal noose around their own necks. The smear campaign provided the perfect leverage Harrison required to turn a civil asset dispute into a looming criminal threat. The trap was no longer just set and waiting. The steel jaws were ready to snap shut. Richard and Susan believed they held the upper hand because Aunt Barbara liked their status update. They were oblivious to the storm gathering right above their pristine suburban roof. The quiet phase of our counterattack was over. The legal hammer was finally prepared to drop, and my parents were about to receive a delivery that would drain the color from their faces and silence their online theatrics forever. The digital theatrics and orchestrated social media outrage came to a sudden, grinding halt on Monday morning. The precise moment the fabricated online narrative died coincided with a knock on the mahogany front door of my parents' pristine colonial house. While my mother was busy drafting another tragic Facebook post about family loyalty, a private process server in a nondescript gray windbreaker stood on their manicured front porch. He asked for Richard Mark. When my father opened the door, the man handed over a thick sealed envelope bearing the embossed gold letterhead of my grandfather's elite corporate law firm. Inside that heavy envelope was a document stripped of all emotion. It contained no familial guilt trips or manipulative appeals to loyalty. It was a formal, legal ultimatum, drafted with the cold, unyielding precision of a surgical scalpel. The lead litigator outlined the exact chronological timeline of the stolen $80,000. The document listed the specific routing numbers, the timestamps, and the recipient limited liability company. The terms dictated by the firm were non-negotiable. Richard and Susan were given exactly 48 hours to return the entire principal sum. In addition to the stolen trust funds, they were mandated to pay an additional $15,000 to cover the accrued legal fees and forensic accounting costs Harrison had incurred. If the total balance of $95,000 was not wired into an escrow account by noon on Wednesday, the firm would bypass civil litigation entirely. The letter explicitly stated that all compiled evidence, including the text message confessions and the fraudulent tax forms, would be submitted directly to the district attorney. The specified charges were federal wire fraud and fiduciary embezzlement. The attorneys attached a printed copy of the relevant state and federal penal codes, highlighting the mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. My parents were no longer dealing with a frustrated college student they could bully into submission. They were facing real custodial prison time. The reality of a looming criminal indictment shatters pride faster than any other force on earth. The fear of sharing a concrete cell evaporates country club arrogance in a matter of seconds. On Tuesday morning, the sky was a dull, bruised purple, threatening rain. I sat at a small corner table inside a local independent coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment building. The air smelled of roasted espresso beans and damp wool. I was nursing a hot Americano while reviewing a dense stack of tort law flashcards. I found a strange, comforting rhythm in studying the mechanics of liability and restitution, while my own family navigated those exact concepts in real time. The brass bell above the cafe entrance chimed. A rush of cold autumn wind swept through the narrow shop, rustling the napkin dispenser on my table. I did not look up immediately. I was focused on memorizing the definition of gross negligence. Then a shadow fell across my study materials, blocking the warm glow of the overhead pendant light. I raised my head, and my breath caught in my throat for a fraction of a second. My father stood on the opposite side of the small wooden table. He looked nothing like the untouchable patriarch who had casually dismissed my future standing in his designer kitchen just 1 week prior. The transformation was startling. Richard Mark appeared to have aged 10 years in a span of 7 days. He wore a wrinkled charcoal suit jacket over a dress shirt, missing its stiff collar stays. He had not shaved. Dark, heavy bags hung beneath his bloodshot eyes, and a sheen of nervous sweat coated his forehead despite the chill in the air. He did not wait for an invitation. He pulled out the metal chair opposite mine and collapsed into it. The chair screeched harshly against the tile floor, drawing the annoyed gaze of a barista behind the counter. "Valeria," he breathed. His voice sounded thin and raspy, like dry leaves scraping across pavement. I slowly placed my highlighter down on the table. I did not shrink back. I folded my hands, resting them deliberately on top of my flashcards. "You are violating the boundaries established by my legal counsel," I stated, keeping my tone flat and professional. "All communication must be directed through the firm." "Please," he interjected, raising a trembling hand. "Just give me 2 minutes, please." He reached into the breast pocket of his rumpled jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. His fingers fumbled with the edges as he smoothed it out against the grainy wood of the cafe table. He pushed the slip of paper across the short distance separating us. It was a certified cashier's check printed from a local credit union. The payee line bore my full legal name. The numerical amount listed was exactly $5,000. I stared at the meager sum. The frozen assets and the federal injunction meant he had zero access to his wealth. To procure this specific check, he must have liquidated a physical asset. He likely sold his vintage watch collection or pawned my mother's diamond tennis bracelet just to scrape together this pathetic amount of liquid cash. "Take this," he pleaded, leaning forward until I could smell the stale coffee and sour fear radiating from his skin. "It is everything I could get my hands on this morning. Take it as a gesture of good faith." "A gesture of good faith," I repeated, testing the hollow words. "Let us not ruin the family over a simple misunderstanding, Val." He continued his words, spilling out in a desperate, frantic rush. "You are my daughter. I was just trying to help your brother get on his feet. Jason has always struggled, and you have always been so capable. I made a mistake with the accounts, I admit that. But we do not need to involve the district attorney. We do not need to destroy our lives. Take the $5,000 today. I swear on my life I will pay you back the rest of the tuition over the next few years. Just pick up your phone, call your grandfather, and tell him to call off the lawyers." I looked at the wrinkled, fearful man sitting across from me. He was still trying to manipulate the narrative. Even while staring down the barrel of a federal indictment, he could not take true accountability. He framed the deliberate theft of an irrevocable trust as a simple misunderstanding. He weaponized my competence, using my ability to survive as the justification for his betrayal. He expected me to accept a fraction of what he stole and shoulder the financial burden of my own education so he could avoid the consequences of funding a social media influencer's lifestyle. I pictured Brittany typing on her smartphone, her wrist heavy with $15,000 worth of gold Cartier jewelry, paid for by my stolen future. Then I looked down at the $5,000 check resting near my coffee cup. It was an insult disguised as an apology. I picked up the slip of paper, holding it lightly between my index and middle finger. My father exhaled a shaky breath, his shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch, believing he had successfully negotiated his salvation. He thought the old dynamic had returned. He thought the obedient daughter was stepping back into her designated role. I slid the check back across the table, pushing it until it touched his knuckles. "I am not accepting a payment plan for my own stolen property," I said. The quiet authority in my voice surprised even me. The demand letter was clear: $95,000 by noon tomorrow. "Valeria," he gasped, his eyes widening in authentic horror. "I do not have it. The accounts are locked. I cannot get a loan. They are going to put me in a cell." "You should have considered that before you forged a wire transfer," I replied. "You are tearing this family apart," he hissed, his desperation flashing into a brief, familiar spark of anger. I slowly stood up from the table, gathering my flashcards and placing them into my leather tote bag. I looked down at the man who had traded my safety for his golden son's comfort. The fear in his eyes was palpable, but it elicited zero sympathy from my heart. The emotional tether that once bound me to his approval was entirely severed. "You ruined the family, Dad," I said softly, delivering the words with surgical precision. "I am just balancing the ledger." I turned my back on him and walked toward the exit. The brass bell chimed brightly as I pushed the glass door open, stepping out into the cold autumn morning. I did not look back to see his reaction. I left him sitting alone at that small table, staring at a worthless piece of paper. He was utterly defeated, stripped of his power and his dignity. But the spectacle was far from over. Despite the impending legal doom and their total lack of funds, Jason and Brittany were still marching toward their next disastrous milestone. They refused to cancel the Lavish country club engagement party scheduled for the upcoming weekend. They were operating on maxed-out credit and profound delusion. It was a grand public theater of fake wealth, and my grandfather and I were preparing to attend the event, uninvited, to deliver the final devastating act. By Saturday evening, the 48-hour deadline established by my grandfather's legal team was drawing dangerously close. Instead of scrambling to liquidate assets or secure a criminal defense attorney, my family decided to host a lavish party. Brittany refused to postpone her grand engagement celebration. She viewed canceling a high society event as a terminal failure. Jason, terrified of losing the woman he had purchased with my stolen tuition money, capitulated to her demands. Since my parents' bank accounts remained frozen under federal order, Jason financed the entire evening using a stack of high-interest credit cards he opened online the day prior. He was bleeding out financially just to maintain a fragile illusion for one more night. Brittany hailed from a family that valued optics above all other virtues. Her father owned a chain of local car dealerships and prided himself on rubbing elbows with old money. Her mother served on the local country club planning committee. They knew nothing about the frozen trust fund or the impending federal indictment. They only knew that Richard Mark was a wealthy man and their daughter had secured the golden heir. For Jason, calling off the party meant admitting failure to people whose approval he desperately craved. He chose financial ruin over temporary embarrassment. Harrison sent a sleek black town car to my apartment at 6 o'clock. I wore a simple, navy-tailored dress. I did not dress to impress the country club elite. I dressed for a corporate execution. When the driver opened the door for me, I slid into the leather back seat next to my grandfather. He wore a midnight blue suit and held a silver-topped walking cane resting between his knees. We did not speak during the 30-minute drive toward the sprawling gated estate of the Oak Ridge Country Club. The silence between us was not tense. It was the calm, steady quiet of two people holding a lit match walking toward a house built of dry straw. The country club loomed at the end of a long, winding driveway lined with ancient weeping willows. Valet attendants rushed to open the heavy doors of our vehicle. We bypassed the guest book podium in the main foyer. I could hear the delicate sounds of a live string quartet drifting through the arched mahogany double doors leading into the grand ballroom. The space was a monument to excess. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over dozens of circular tables draped in white silk linen. Waitstaff in crisp uniforms circulated, carrying silver trays loaded with seared scallops and premium sparkling wine. Tall centerpieces made of imported white orchids adorned every table. Harrison pushed the heavy ballroom doors open. He did not sneak in. He walked with the heavy, measured footfalls of a man accustomed to owning the ground beneath his shoes. I walked right beside him, keeping my chin elevated. The grand ballroom was packed with over 100 guests, laughing and drinking. Jason stood near the center of the room wearing a custom tuxedo, holding a microphone, preparing to give a toast. Brittany stood next to him, wearing a designer silk gown that cost more than my annual rent. The cellist, playing near the entrance, was the first to notice the shift in the room. He saw my grandfather's stern, unyielding expression and faltered, dragging his bow harshly across the strings. The discordant screech acted like an alarm bell. The violinist stopped playing a second later. The music died instantly. The silence rippled outward, moving through the crowd like a cold winter draft. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes ceased. Heads turned. Conversations died in mid-sentence. The joyous atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a thick, palpable tension. My mother spotted us from across the room. Her face drained of all color, leaving her pale and drawn beneath her expensive makeup. She possessed a supernatural instinct for damage control. In her mind, the most terrifying threat on earth was public scandal. She set her drink down on a passing tray and practically sprinted toward us. Her heels clicked frantically against the polished hardwood floor. She plastered a rigid, terrified smile onto her face, attempting to project the image of a delighted hostess greeting unexpected family members. Harrison Susan gasped breathless as she closed the distance. Her eyes darted nervously toward the wealthy guests watching us. "Valeria, what a wonderful surprise! We thought you were working late tonight. Please, let us step into the hallway and catch up." She reached out to grab my arm, aiming to herd us out of the ballroom before the pristine facade cracked. Harrison did not move. He planted his silver cane onto the floor with a sharp, loud thud that echoed through the silent room. "We are not stepping into the hallway, Susan," he stated. His gravelly voice possessed a booming, resonant quality that carried effortlessly to the far corners of the grand space. "We are not here to catch up." Richard materialized from the crowd, stepping up behind his wife. He looked haggard. The collar of his dress shirt was tight against his flushed neck. He tried to project dominance, but his hands were shaking. "Dad," he warned, keeping his voice low and threatening, "you need to leave right now. This is my son's night. Do not ruin this." Harrison looked at the man he had raised with an expression of profound, clinical disgust. "I am not the one who ruined anything, Richard." My grandfather turned his head slowly, surveying the room. He looked directly at the front table, where Brittany's parents sat frozen in their seats, holding their half-empty wine glasses. He raised his voice, ensuring every single suburban socialite, every business associate, and every extended relative heard the unvarnished truth. "Did you tell her parents you funded this circus with your daughter's stolen trust fund?" Harrison asked. The question hung in the air, suspended like a blade over the ballroom. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Richard opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. Susan let out a soft, strangled gasp and covered her lips with her trembling hand. Jason dropped his microphone. It hit the hardwood floor with a deafening electronic squeal that made several guests flinch. Harrison continued, his voice ringing with undeniable authority. "Did you explain to your future in-laws that you are currently under a federal injunction for wire fraud? Did you tell them the caviar they are eating was purchased using embezzled tuition money?" The deafening, suffocating silence that followed was the sound of a legacy dying. The public mask my parents spent decades meticulously constructing cracked and shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. The illusion of the perfect, wealthy colonial family evaporated under the crystal chandeliers. They were exposed not in a private living room or a quiet law office, but in front of the exact audience they worshipped most. The country club elite stared at my father, not with respect, but with undisguised horror and pity. I looked at the people who had tormented me for my entire life. I felt no guilt. I felt only the clean, sharp edge of justice. They had tried to bury me in the dark so my brother could shine in the light. Now the spotlight was fixed directly on their crimes, and there was nowhere left to hide. Brittany looked at Jason, her perfectly contoured face contorting into an expression of genuine terror. She realized the credit cards, the designer dress, and the catered food were all built on a criminal house of cards that had just collapsed onto her shoulders. Her parents stood up from their table, their expressions shifting from confusion to profound outrage. The entire social hierarchy of the room inverted in a matter of seconds. Would you have the nerve to crash the party, or would you let them pretend everything was fine? Let me know below, because the fallout was incredible. The silence in the grand ballroom felt heavy enough to crush bone. Harrison had just dropped a tactical nuclear strike on my parents' carefully curated social facade. Every eye shifted from my grandfather toward the head table where Brittany's parents sat. William and Diane Sterling owned 3 luxury auto dealerships in the tri-state area. Diane spent her days chairing charity galas and judging her neighbors' landscaping choices. They worshipped old money and despised financial instability more than anything else on earth. When the words federal injunction and embezzled tuition echoed across the room, William stood up. His chair scraped harshly against the polished oak floor. He did not look at my father with concern. He looked at him with the cold, calculating glare of a businessman, realizing he was being scammed by a con artist. Richard Williams said, his voice rigid and demanding. "What is this man talking about? Is your family under federal investigation?" My father swallowed hard. The veins in his neck bulged against his starched collar. "William, please do not listen to him. It is a private, familial misunderstanding. My father is just confused. He is having an episode. We are sorting it out internally." Harrison let out a sharp, humorless laugh that cut through Richard's pathetic lie. Confused, my grandfather repeated, "I am lucid enough to hire the forensic accountants who traced your wire fraud. I am lucid enough to freeze your bank accounts. You are destitute, Richard. You are funding this party on high-interest credit cards because a federal judge locked your assets 3 days ago." A collective gasp rippled through the gathered crowd. The word destitute was the ultimate curse in this specific zip code. Brittany stood frozen next to Jason. Her designer silk gown suddenly looked less like a symbol of triumph and more like a rented costume. She had spent the last 8 months treating my brother like a human blank check. She tolerated his lack of ambition and his constant need for validation because she firmly believed she was marrying into an endless fortune. She thought Jason was the heir to a pristine suburban dynasty. Now she realized she had attached her wagon to a sinking ship, carrying nothing but debt and pending criminal charges. Her eyes darted from my grandfather's stoic face to my father's sweating brow. Finally, she turned her gaze toward Jason. The man she called her soulmate just a few moments prior now looked like a terrified child caught stealing candy. Jason Brittany demanded her, voice trembling with rising panic. "Tell me he is lying. Tell me your accounts are not frozen." Jason opened his mouth, but his signature arrogance had evaporated. He looked down at his expensive leather shoes, unable to meet her intense gaze. "Britt, I can explain," he stammered. "We just need to clear up some paperwork with the trust. It is going to be fine, I promise." He used the word trust. He confirmed the existence of the disputed funds. That single, stuttered admission was all the proof Brittany required. The aspiring social media influencer realized her entire brand launch and her high society engagement were built on stolen cash that was currently being tracked by the district attorney. The wealthy future she had bragged about online was a mirage. Her panic mutated into unfiltered rage. "You lied to me," she shrieked. The elegant poise she spent hours cultivating vanished, revealing the shallow mercenary underneath. "You told me your family was loaded. You told me the business capital was a gift from your father." Jason reached out, attempting to grab her hands. "Babe, please keep your voice down. Everyone is watching us. Let us go outside and talk." "Do not touch me," she screamed, slapping his hands away with a sharp crack that echoed across the ballroom. "You are broke. You are a criminal. You let me plan this entire event knowing you could not pay for it. My parents invited their friends to this joke of a party. You humiliated me in front of everyone I know." She did not care about the betrayal I had suffered. She did not care that my education was stolen to fund her lifestyle. She only cared that her luxury illusion was shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. She reached down and grabbed her left hand. Her fingers dug into the sparkling diamond engagement ring Jason had presented to her just a month prior. The ring he undoubtedly purchased using my tuition money or a line of credit he could never repay. She yanked the jewelry off her finger. The diamond caught the light of the crystal chandeliers for a brief, dazzling second. She reared her arm back and threw the heavy ring directly at Jason's chest. It struck his lapel and clattered onto the hardwood floor, bouncing away under a nearby catering table. "The engagement is over," Brittany announced, her voice cracking with fury. "Mom, Dad, we are leaving. Right now." William and Diane Sterling did not need to be told twice. They gathered their coats and marched toward the exit, refusing to even glance in my parents' direction. Their departure functioned as the ultimate signal for the rest of the room. The Oak Ridge Country Club crowd possessed zero loyalty for disgraced members. They were attending to network and be seen. Associating with a family facing federal indictment was social suicide. Chairs scraped against the floor. Guests stood up, grabbing their luxury purses and avoiding eye contact with the head table. The mass exodus began. I turned my attention toward my mother. Susan had spent her entire adult life curating an image of effortless superiority. She judged her neighbors for overgrown lawns and looked down on anyone who did not wear the correct designer labels. Now the foundation of her identity was disintegrating in real time. She did not yell. She did not try to stop the fleeing guests. The weight of the public humiliation crushed her physical posture. She collapsed into a gold chivari chair. Her pristine posture dissolved. She buried her face in her hands, pulling her perfectly styled hair into a disheveled mess. The expensive fabric of her country club dress wrinkled around her as she folded inward, shrinking away from the judging stares of her former friends. Richard panicked. He grabbed the microphone Jason had dropped. The speakers emitted a harsh feedback whine. "Please, everyone," he pleaded, his voice echoing off the emptying walls. "Please stay. Dinner is about to be served. This is just a private family dispute. We can explain everything." Nobody stopped. Nobody turned around. The guests continued streaming through the arched mahogany doors, leaving their half-empty champagne flutes abandoned on the tables. The waitstaff stood frozen in the corners, unsure of what to do with the silver trays of seared scallops. I stood next to Harrison, watching the destruction of the Mark family empire. For 22 years, they had made me feel small. They conditioned me to accept the background role while they poured all their resources and affection into my brother. They demanded my silence to protect their comfort and expected me to endure hardship so Jason could avoid it. I did not need to scream to achieve victory. I did not need to throw a tantrum or stoop to their level of emotional manipulation. The cold, hard exposure of the truth was the most devastating weapon in the world. I stood tall, my spine straight, feeling a profound sense of liberation wash over me. The heavy chains of familial obligation were broken forever. I was no longer the scapegoat bearing the weight of their sins. I was the architect of their accountability. Harrison placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "You did well, Valeria," he said quietly. "Let us go. There is nothing left for us here." We turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving my father begging into a dead microphone, my brother staring at an empty ring box, and my mother weeping into her trembling hands. The pristine colonial facade was reduced to ash. But the destruction of their public image was merely the beginning of their punishment. Without stolen money and without their fake social standing, the toxic family had nothing left to bind them together. As the doors closed behind us, I knew exactly what would happen next. They were about to turn their remaining rage on each other, tearing themselves apart from the inside out. The Sunday morning following the Oak Ridge Country Club incident brought a heavy, suffocating quiet to the suburbs. The orchestrated social media campaign ceased abruptly. The extended relatives who had readily condemned me just days prior suddenly deleted their posts, retreating into an embarrassed, tense silence. But behind the closed oak doors of my parents' colonial home, a brutal internal reckoning unfolded. A toxic familial system requires a designated victim to absorb the pressure and maintain the fragile equilibrium. Without my presence to shoulder the blame and provide a convenient target, the unit turned its fangs inward. Starved of external validation and cut off from their financial resources, they began to devour one another like cornered wolves. Brittany did not just return the discarded diamond engagement ring and walk away. She executed a ruthless tactical retreat from my brother's life. On Monday afternoon, while Jason wallowed in a pit of self-pity inside their shared downtown luxury apartment, she hired a cut-rate moving company. She systematically stripped the residents of everything holding even remote value. She directed the movers to take the velvet sectional sofa, the imported Italian espresso machine, and the flat-screen television. She even packed the custom silk curtains, leaving Jason sitting on a bare, scratched hardwood floor, surrounded by nothing but echoing empty walls and high-interest credit card statements. He possessed zero professional skills and zero savings. The lifestyle brand was dead. The influencer dream evaporated, leaving only the harsh reality of impending debt. For 26 years, Richard and Susan had shielded their firstborn son from every logical consequence. They built an impenetrable protective fortress around his fragile ego, paving his road with my stolen resources. When that fortress finally crumbled, Jason did not look inward to find resilience or take accountability. He lacked the basic capacity for self-reflection. Instead, he directed his unbridled rage at the two people who engineered his sheltered existence. He drove his luxury vehicle to the pristine suburban house and unleashed a spectacular tantrum in the middle of their spotless marble kitchen. He did not blame his own lack of ambition. He did not fault his reckless spending habits. He blamed his parents for failing to manage me. He screamed at my father, calling him weak for allowing a grandfather to freeze the bank accounts. He berated my mother for failing to manipulate the public narrative successfully. He accused them of ruining his pristine future because they could not keep their quiet, obedient daughter in her designated corner. The golden child became their harshest judge and their cruelest executioner. I learned the precise details of this internal collapse much later, but I felt the residual tremors immediately. On Tuesday evening, I stood on the small concrete balcony of my studio apartment. The city skyline twinkled in the distance, painting the horizon in beautiful shades of amber and slate gray. A crisp autumn breeze rustled the leaves of the oak trees lining the street below. My smartphone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled the device out and looked at the glowing screen. A single text message from Jason stared back at me. "You ruined my life. I hope you are happy." I read those 2 short sentences several times, letting the words hang in the cool night air. I expected to feel a surge of triumphant vindication. I anticipated the sweet, satisfying rush of delivered justice. Instead, a strange, hollow ache bloomed deep inside my chest. It was a brief, sudden pang of profound grief. Hot tears pricked the corners of my eyes, blurring the neon lights of the passing traffic. I leaned against the freezing metal railing and let the unexpected sadness wash over me. I was not weeping for the man who sent the cruel text. I was not mourning the parents who pilfered my education funds to finance his delusions. I was grieving the fundamental absence of a loving home. I cried for the childhood I never truly experienced and the unconditional support I would never receive. I shed tears for the little girl who tried so hard for 2 decades to earn a place at a dining table where all the comfortable chairs were permanently reserved for someone else. As I wiped my damp cheeks, the smartphone buzzed a second time. The caller ID displayed my grandfather's name. I swiped the glass screen to answer, taking a slow, steadying breath before speaking. "Hello, Grandpa," I said, keeping my voice as level as possible. "Valeria," he began, his deep, gravelly voice, carrying a profound sense of steady calm. "You sound unsettled tonight. Are you shedding tears over the wreckage they created?" I just received a message from Jason, I admitted, wrapping my woven cardigan tighter around my shoulders to ward off the encroaching chill. He says I ruined his future. It hurts more than I thought it would. Not because I regret defending myself or protecting my assets. It just hurts that we could never be a real family. Harrison let out a soft, knowing sigh. It was the specific kind of sound a veteran general makes when surveying the aftermath of a necessary battle. "Listen to me very carefully, Valeria," he instructed, his tone firm, but layered with rare paternal warmth. "You are experiencing a necessary pain right now, but you must identify the source of that ache correctly. You do not mourn those specific people. You mourn the phantom. You are grieving the fantasy of a protective father, a nurturing mother, and a loyal brother. That fantasy never existed in reality. It was a ghost you chased for your entire life. Tonight, you are simply burying the ghost. Let it go." His wisdom functioned like a heavy brass key turning in a rusted iron lock. The suffocating weight lifted from my weary shoulders in an instant. He was right. The guilt I carried was a conditioned response installed by toxic people who needed me to feel small so they could feel tall. The invisible umbilical cord of shame and obligation was finally severed. I pulled the phone away from my ear and navigated to the messaging application. I tapped on Jason's contact profile. I scrolled down to the very bottom of the menu screen and pressed the stark red button labeled Block Caller. I did the exact same thing for Richard. I repeated the cleansing process for Susan. One by one, I permanently exiled them from my digital and emotional life. I shut the virtual doors, locking them outside in the cold reality of their own making. I chose profound, unshakable peace over the promise of toxic reconciliation. I slipped the device back into my pocket and looked up at the vast night sky. The air smelled of impending rain and fresh asphalt. For the first time in 22 years, I felt entirely free, unburdened by the demands of a golden child and the expectations of manipulative parents. But the emotional severing was only one half of the final equation. The 48-hour legal deadline established by the corporate litigators expired the very next morning at noon. My father failed to wire the demanded $95,000 into the secure escrow account. He possessed zero liquid capital to meet the strict requirement. The brief grace period ended. The corporate attorneys drafted the final settlement papers, forcing my parents into a brutal financial reckoning. Richard and Susan were out of time, out of flimsy excuses, and out of options. To avoid standing before a federal judge wearing steel handcuffs, they had to liquidate the very things they valued most. The illusion of their wealth was shattered, and the true cost of their betrayal was about to be extracted. The noon deadline arrived on Wednesday with the precision of a ticking metronome. My grandfather did not grant extensions. The corporate litigators did not bluff. When the clock struck 12 and the secure escrow account remained empty, the lead attorney initiated the final sequence. He did not call my father to negotiate. He drafted the formal submission package for the district attorney, detailing the exact penal codes for federal wire fraud and fiduciary embezzlement. He placed his finger on the mouse, ready to transmit the digital files to the prosecutor's office. My father broke at 2 minutes past the hour. Richard Mark called the law firm, his voice trembling so hard the receptionist could barely understand his frantic words. He begged for a temporary stay of execution. He pleaded for a settlement meeting. The litigators granted him a singular, narrow window of opportunity to avoid wearing steel handcuffs. They drafted a binding confession of judgment. This specific legal instrument meant that if my parents failed to deliver the full $95,000 within a new 48-hour grace period, a guilty verdict would be automatically entered against them in civil court, paving an effortless path for criminal charges. To secure this brief reprieve, Richard and Susan had to endure a brutal financial reckoning. Since their primary checking accounts and retirement portfolios remained frozen under the federal injunction, they possessed zero liquid capital. They were forced to cannibalize their own lifestyle to survive. The lawyers mandated the immediate liquidation of physical assets. The first casualty was the golden idol. Jason spent the last 2 years treating his pristine white luxury SUV like a royal carriage. It was the unearned reward for his mediocre community college performance. On Thursday morning, Richard drove that exact vehicle to a local auto dealership. Because it was a desperate, forced sale, the dealer offered a ruthlessly low purchase price. My father had to hand over the title and the keys, accepting a check for $35,000. Jason was left standing in the driveway of the colonial house, staring at an empty patch of concrete. The physical manifestation of his favored status was auctioned off to pay for the crimes committed to sustain it. But $35,000 did not cover the demanded total. My parents still owed $60,000 to clear the restitution and the legal penalties. Traditional banks refused to approve a short-term loan due to the active federal hold on their profiles. Richard had to turn to a hard money lender. He signed a predatory, high-interest second mortgage against the immaculate suburban house. Susan wept openly in the kitchen as the notary stamped the loan documents. The pristine colonial facade with its fresh slate gray paint and manicured lawn now concealed a crushing, suffocating monthly payment. They traded their long-term financial security for a brief escape from the prison system. The funds cleared the escrow clearinghouse on Monday afternoon. On a random Tuesday morning, I woke up in my cramped studio apartment. The sky outside my single window was a crisp, bright blue. The old radiator in the corner hissed softly, filling the small room with familiar warmth. I walked into the kitchen wearing oversized sweatpants and poured a simple glass of tap water. I picked up my smartphone to check my daily schedule. A small banner notification rested on the lock screen. It was an alert from my primary banking application. I unlocked the device and opened the financial ledger. My breath caught in my throat. I stood perfectly still on the faded linoleum floor, staring at the digital numbers glowing on the screen. Available balance, $95,000.42. I traced the digits with my thumb. The sheer gravity of that number washed over me in a slow, steady wave. It was not just a sum of currency. It was the physical manifestation of my victory. It represented the exact value of the education my parents tried to steal, plus the cost of the damage they inflicted trying to cover their tracks. The balance was restored. The scales of justice tipped firmly back into their rightful position. I did not feel the urge to scream or dance. I felt a profound anchoring sense of peace. The haunting specter of poverty and the crushing fear of student debt vanished into the morning air. I carried my phone to the small wooden desk where this entire ordeal began weeks ago. I opened my laptop and navigated to the university financial portal. The login screen loaded instantly. I typed my credentials, accessing the exact same web page that had flashed a stark red declined error message during that rainy August night. I selected the payment tab. I entered the routing numbers for my newly replenished account. I typed out the full tuition amount for my first semester of law school. I did not hesitate. I pushed the submit button. The gray loading circle spun for 3 seconds. The tension in my chest tightened reflexively, anticipating a rejection. Then the screen refreshed. A bright green banner appeared across the top of the monitor. Payment successful. Current balance due, $0. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long, trembling exhale. I was enrolled. I owned my seat in the lecture hall. I possessed no predatory student loans. I carried no crippling debt. I owed 0 favors to the people who raised me. The invisible strings my parents used to manipulate my choices were incinerated. I was stepping into my demanding legal career as a free, independent woman. I closed the laptop and decided my usual routine required a deliberate disruption. I took a hot shower and dressed in my favorite tailored slacks and a crisp white blouse. I bypassed my cheap drip coffee maker and walked out into the bustling city streets. The autumn air tasted clean and sharp. I walked 3 blocks to an artisan cafe I usually avoided due to their exorbitant prices. The shop smelled of roasted espresso beans and fresh vanilla. I stood at the polished counter and ordered their most expensive single-origin pour-over roast. The barista handed me a warm ceramic cup. I pulled out my debit card and tapped the payment terminal. The transaction approved instantly. I sat at a small window table watching the busy commuters rush past the glass pane. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark, rich coffee. It tasted like triumph. It tasted like a future I built with my own hands and defended with my own spine. I was ready to focus entirely on my rigorous legal studies and build a brilliant, independent life. But profound wealth and sudden power rarely exist in a vacuum. The moment you prove you can destroy a kingdom, the surrounding spectators begin to view you through a different lens. The extended family members who had eagerly participated in my mother's digital smear campaign were currently sitting in stunned silence. They watched Richard and Susan tumble from the apex of the suburban social ladder. They saw Jason lose his luxury vehicle and his wealthy fiancée in a matter of days. The relatives realized the flow of resources had permanently shifted. The Mark family fortune no longer belonged to my disgraced father. The old money my grandfather controlled was now clearly aligning behind me. The same cousin who had publicly labeled me a disgrace just 2 weeks ago. The vultures were smelling the shift in the wind, and the next phase of my journey would require me to defend my new empire from the very people trying to crawl out of the wreckage. A full year evaporated into the demanding rhythm of legal academia. The crisp autumn air that tasted of victory transformed into a harsh winter and melted into a productive spring. I was no longer a struggling paralegal formatting exhibits in a cramped midtown office. I was a first-year law student sitting in the front row of a prestigious lecture hall. My heavy textbooks smelled of fresh ink and endless possibility. While my peers agonized over mounting student debt and predatory loan interest rates, my financial ledger remained perfectly balanced. The restitution fund secured my tuition and afforded me a quiet, spacious apartment near the campus library. For the first time in 23 years, my mind was entirely unburdened by survival tactics. I poured every ounce of my energy into mastering contract law and civil procedure. The most profound transformation did not occur inside the classroom. It happened 40 stories above the bustling city streets, inside my grandfather's penthouse. Sunday dinners became our sacred ritual. Before the reckoning, I barely knew Harrison Mark. We ate thick cuts of medium-rare steak and drank dark roasted coffee. Instead of gossiping about suburban scandals, Harrison spread wide architectural blueprints and commercial lease agreements across the polished wood. He taught me how to read zoning permits and identify liability loopholes in corporate contracts. "You possess a sharp mind, Valeria," he told me one evening, tapping a silver pen against a property deed. Richard lacked the discipline to understand the mechanics of building a legacy. He only wanted the unearned status that accompanied it. "Your brother inherited that same pathetic entitlement. You inherited my spine." Those words settled deep into my bones. Harrison did not treat me like a fragile glass doll or a secondary character in a golden child's narrative. He treated me like a formidable peer. He became the true family I spent my entire childhood searching for. He was a mentor, a protector, and a brilliant strategist. Under his quiet guidance, I blossomed from a defensive scapegoat into a confident operator. I learned how to separate emotion from negotiation and how to recognize a bad investment from a mile away. That specific skill was tested on a rainy Tuesday afternoon during my second semester. I was sitting in the campus commons drinking a green tea and reviewing notes for an upcoming torts exam. My smartphone chimed on the metal table. The caller identification displayed a name I had not seen in 12 months. It was my cousin, Amanda. Amanda was my father's niece. During the orchestrated smear campaign the previous year, she was the loudest voice in the digital choir. I never replied to her vitriol, and I eventually archived her contact information. Now, a lengthy text message illuminated my screen. It began with an artificial, sickly sweet greeting. "Hey Val," it read. "It has been way too long. I miss you so much. We really need to grab brunch and catch up on life. Family, I will pay you back with interest once the brand takes off. Family helps family, right? Let me know." I stared at the glowing pixels. A year ago, a message like this would have sent my heart rate skyrocketing. The old Valeria would have felt a familiar twisting knot of conditioned guilt. Richard and Susan were drowning under a predatory second mortgage, and Jason was working a minimum wage retail job to pay off his maxed out credit cards. The parasitic relatives realized the suburban bank was permanently closed. They noticed my close proximity to Harrison and assumed my newfound stability made me an easy target for extortion. Amanda invoked the word family as a weapon. It was the same manipulative tactic my father used when he demanded I sign fraudulent tax documents. They treated loyalty like a blank check they could cash whenever their own poor decisions caught up with them. I did not agonize over my response. I did not draft a polite excuse about tight budgets or legal restrictions. I tapped the reply field and typed 5 simple words. I am not a bank. I pressed send. I did not wait for her inevitable defensive explosion. I tapped her profile picture, navigated to the bottom of the screen, and selected Block Caller. I deleted the entire message thread, erasing her from my digital ecosystem in 2 seconds. Harrison and I expanded our Sunday routines to include morning walks through the city parks, discussing potential commercial acquisitions. He was teaching me the intricate details of his multi-million-dollar empire, preparing me for a future I never dared to imagine. We were an unstoppable team, navigating the world with shared vision and mutual respect. But life rarely allows profound peace to linger indefinitely. The universe has a cruel habit of balancing immense joy with sudden, crushing loss. During a quiet dinner in late November, I noticed Harrison rubbing his left arm, his breathing unusually shallow. He dismissed it as simple fatigue from a long day of negotiations. I poured him a fresh cup of coffee, and we continued discussing a downtown zoning permit. I said, Harrison. I packed my books into my leather tote bag, walking out into the biting winter wind, feeling entirely untethered. But the machinery of immense generational wealth does not pause for grief. The letter required my presence for the official reading of the last will and testament. I knew, with sickening certainty, that my parents and my brother received the exact same heavy envelope. The meeting took place on the 50th floor of a towering glass skyscraper in the financial district. I stepped off the silent elevator wearing a tailored black sheath dress, my posture straight and my expression guarded. The receptionist guided me into a sprawling mahogany conference room that smelled of lemon polish and expensive leather. A sprawling panoramic window offered a sweeping view of the gray winter skyline. 10 minutes later, the heavy oak doors swung open. Richard, Susan, and Jason walked into the room. It was the first time I had shared physical space with them since the disastrous engagement party a year prior. The intervening 12 months had not been kind to my parents. The crushing weight of their predatory second mortgage and the public humiliation of their exposed crimes carved deep, exhausted lines into their faces. Jason's posture slouched, his former golden child arrogance replaced by the weary shuffle of a man working retail to pay off staggering credit card debt. Yet despite their evident financial ruin, my father walked into the conference room wearing a brand new tailored suit. He likely financed the garment on a fresh line of credit, convinced this meeting represented his ultimate salvation. He believed his father's sudden death hit the reset button on their fractured relationship. In Richard's mind, the frozen accounts and the federal investigation were temporary hurdles. He operated under the delusional assumption that blood hierarchy superseded all prior betrayals. He thought the old man had forgiven him in the end. Richard sat directly across the wide mahogany table from me. He adjusted his silk tie and offered me a patronizing smirk. He looked around the luxurious room as if he already owned the building. Susan sat beside him, smoothing her skirt, performing the role of the dignified, grieving daughter-in-law for the benefit of the attorney. Jason stared at the grain of the wood, avoiding my gaze entirely. Thomas Caldwell entered the room carrying a thick leather binder. He did not offer warm condolences or empty pleasantries. He took his seat at the head of the long table, opening the binder with a sharp, decisive snap. He explained the legal parameters of the document, verifying the date of the final signature. The will had been fully updated and notarized just 3 months prior. Richard leaned forward in his leather chair, resting his elbows on the table, his eyes gleaming with undisguised greed. He was mentally spending the inheritance, preparing to pay off his suffocating loans and buy his way back into the suburban country club. Caldwell turned to the third page of the heavy document. He cleared his throat and began reading the specific asset distributions. The legal phrasing was dense, but the underlying message was devastatingly clear. "I direct your attention to Article 4, Section 2, Caldwell stated, his voice echoing off the glass walls. To my son, Richard Mark, I bequeath the sum of exactly $1. The air in the room vanished. Richard's patronizing smirk froze on his face. He blinked rapidly, his brain struggling to process the spoken words. $1, he repeated, his voice a fragile whisper. There must be a typographical error. There is no error, Caldwell replied, staring at my father over the rim of his reading glasses. Your father explicitly directed this specific amount. Furthermore, the document includes a strict in terrorem clause. If you choose to contest this will in any probate court, you forfeit the $1 and assume liability for all resulting legal fees incurred by the estate. He left you $1 single to legally prove you were not accidentally forgotten. You were intentionally discarded. Susan let out a sharp, strangled gasp. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror. The pristine facade she tried so hard to maintain crumbled into dust. She turned her head slowly, looking at her husband, watching the realization wash over his aging features. Caldwell turned the page, his expression remaining entirely neutral. He continued reading the final distribution. The entirety of the residual estate, including all liquid capital commercial real estate holdings, corporate equity, and personal property, is hereby left to my granddaughter, Valeria Mark. The attorney paused, looking directly at me. Before reading the final personal addendum Harrison had attached to the legal text. I leave this empire to Valeria because she possesses the unwavering integrity and backbone this family so desperately lacks. She built her own table when she was denied a seat at ours. The cinematic devastation that painted my parents' faces was profound. The sheer mathematical gravity of their own foolishness struck them simultaneously. A year ago, Richard and Susan decided to steal $80,000 from my tuition fund to finance a fake lifestyle for Jason and his mercenary girlfriend. They chose temporary suburban optics over basic morality. Sitting in that towering glass office, the true cost of their betrayal was finally quantified. By attempting to steal $80,000, they had permanently forfeited an inheritance worth tens of millions. They traded an empire for a fraction of a fraction. Jason slumped forward in his chair, resting his forehead against the cool mahogany wood. He realized his parents could no longer protect him. There was no secret trust fund waiting to rescue him from his minimum wage reality. The endless, automated teller machine was permanently unplugged. He was forced to face the bleak, unvarnished truth of his own manufactured incompetence. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I did not smile. I did not gloat. The quiet power of my grandfather's final strategic maneuver required no verbal embellishment. Harrison struck from beyond the grave, delivering a masterclass in ultimate accountability. He ensured my future was untouchable while cementing their ruin in binding legal ink. The reading concluded. Thomas Caldwell closed the heavy leather binder, sliding a stack of transfer documents toward my side of the table. The shift in the room was palpable. I entered the building as a promising law student, mourning a terrible loss. I was walking out as the sole executive proprietor of a staggering commercial dynasty. My father stared at me, his eyes red and frantic. The dynamic had shifted for the final time. I held every single card, and my parents, driven by pure, suffocating desperation, were about to make one last pathetic attempt to cross a boundary I had sealed in steel. The transition from a struggling law student to the head of a commercial real estate empire did not happen overnight. It required months of rigorous discipline. I spent my mornings attending advanced contract seminars and my afternoons sitting in boardrooms reviewing commercial leases. I stepped into the formidable shoes my grandfather left behind. I moved out of my cramped studio apartment and relocated to the top floor of a sleek residential high-rise, located in the center of the financial district. The building was one of the crown jewels in the Mark family portfolio. The penthouse featured floor-to-ceiling windows framing a breathtaking view of the urban skyline. The polished hardwood floors and stark minimalist furniture offered a daily reminder of the quiet, organized peace I had secured. I did not purchase flashy sports cars or designer handbags. I invested the revenue back into the corporate holdings, ensuring the legacy Harrison built would outlast us all. I was 24 years old, holding the reins of a staggering fortune, and I navigated the heavy responsibility with a cold, clear focus. But desperate people rarely respect boundaries unprompted. My parents spent the winter drowning under the crushing weight of their poor financial decisions. Their predatory second mortgage drained their monthly income. Jason was fired from his retail position for chronic lateness, retreating to his childhood bedroom to play video games while his parents aged a decade in 6 months. They exhausted every available line of credit. They needed a lifeline, and they convinced themselves that blood relations would eventually override my documented boundaries. It happened on a crisp Tuesday morning in early April. I was sitting at my wide marble kitchen island, reviewing a thick stack of quarterly earnings reports. I held a warm cup of black coffee, taking a slow, deliberate sip as the sun rose over the steel skyscrapers. The intercom mounted on the wall near the private elevator chimed twice. I pressed the communication button. "Yes, Marcus," I answered, recognizing the shift schedule of the lobby staff. "Ms. Mark," the deep professional voice of the head concierge echoed through the speaker. "I apologize for the interruption. There are 2 individuals in the main lobby claiming to be your parents. They bypassed the exterior gate by tailgating a delivery truck. They are demanding to see you. They claim it is a severe family emergency." A cold, familiar knot formed in my stomach, but it unraveled just as quickly. A year ago, the mere thought of an unexpected ambush by my father would have sent my heart rate spiking. Now, sitting in a fortress I owned, I felt nothing but a dull, clinical weariness. "Turn on the security feed to my primary monitor," I instructed. The wide, flat-screen television mounted in the living room flickered to life. The high-definition camera captured the expansive marble lobby of my building. Richard and Susan stood near the polished brass reception desk. They looked remarkably small. My father wore a faded trench coat, his shoulders stooped. My mother held a generic, plastic-wrapped bouquet of grocery store tulips. It was a pathetic, hollow gesture. They had arrived to trade a $10 floral arrangement for a multi-million-dollar bailout. I watched them pace nervously across the imported tile. They were preparing their emotional manipulation tactics. They likely rehearsed a tearful apology designed to invoke my pity. They expected me to ride the elevator down to the ground floor. They anticipated a dramatic confrontation where they could deploy tears and empty promises to pry open the heavy vault doors of my grandfather's estate. I did not give them the audience they craved. "Marcus," I said, keeping my tone perfectly even, "in the top drawer of the reception desk, you will find a sealed folder with my name printed on the tab. Please open it." I heard the rustle of heavy paper through the intercom. "Yes, ma'am, I have it." "Hand the document to the gentleman in the trench coat," I directed. "It is a formal cease and desist order alongside a legally binding trespassing warning drafted by my corporate counsel. Inform them that if they do not vacate the premises within 60 seconds, you will dispatch the authorities to escort them out in handcuffs. I am not coming down." I stood in my quiet living room watching the silent security feed. Marcus stepped out from behind the imposing desk, holding the crisp white envelope. He approached my parents, his posture radiating unyielding authority. He handed the document to Richard and delivered the verbal warning. I watched my father's reaction play out in high definition. He tore open the envelope and scanned the legal text. The desperate hope drained from his features, replaced by stark, unvarnished defeat. He looked up at the security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. He knew I was watching. He opened his mouth to argue, but Marcus stepped forward, placing a firm hand near his radio communicator. The threat of public arrest was the only language my parents truly understood. Susan dropped the cheap tulips onto the pristine marble floor. She buried her face in her hands, weeping silent tears of genuine despair. Richard grabbed her elbow, turning her around. They walked out through the heavy glass revolving doors, shuffling into the busy city street until they disappeared from the camera frame entirely. The interaction lasted less than 3 minutes. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I utilized the precise tools of my new reality to enforce the perimeter of my peace. I turned off the monitor and walked toward the expansive glass doors leading out to the private terrace. I pushed the heavy slider open and stepped into the crisp spring air. The city stretched out below me, a vibrant, sprawling grid of concrete and ambition. The distant hum of morning traffic provided a steady, comforting rhythm. I rested my hands on the cool metal railing, looking out over the commercial skyline I now owned a piece of. Standing on that balcony, I realized the profound truth of my journey. From a psychological perspective, a toxic family structure relies on a designated scapegoat to function. The golden child receives the praise and the unearned rewards, while the scapegoat absorbs the blame, the unpaid labor, and the emotional neglect. The system is rigged from the very beginning. You cannot win by playing their game, because the rules are specifically designed to ensure your defeat. For 22 years, I tried to earn a place at a table where the chairs were bolted to the floor, and my name was never written on a place card. I equated submission with survival. I believed that if I made myself small enough, useful enough, and quiet enough, they would eventually see my value. But setting boundaries is not an act of revenge. It is the natural, necessary consequence of being chronically disrespected. Walking away is not a betrayal of family. It is a fierce declaration of self-preservation. My parents lost their daughter the exact moment they decided my future was acceptable collateral damage to fund an illusion. They thought I was just the background character in my brother's story. They assumed I would stand in the shadows and silently hand over my resources to ensure his comfort. They expected me to read the script they wrote for me without ever questioning the plot. They forgot that I was the one holding the pen. I did not just rewrite my own ending. I bought the publishing house. I traded a lifetime of conditional crumbs for a kingdom of my own making. The girl who cried on a freezing bus stop bench was gone. In her place stood a formidable operator who knew exactly what she was worth. If you are the scapegoat in your family, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you. You will never convince committed manipulators to see your inherent value. You must stop waiting for their permission to thrive. Remember that you deserve to be chosen first, not as an afterthought, not as a financial backup plan, and not as a sacrificial lamb for someone else's ease. Let them go. Cut the tether. Build your own empire, brick by brick, and do not ever apologize for protecting the sanctuary you create. Thank you for listening. Drop a heart in the comments if you stayed till the end, and I will see you in the next story. The story of Valeria Mark is far more than a simple narrative about frozen bank accounts and courtroom vindication. It is a profound psychological exploration of the invisible, fragile contracts that either bind a family together or shatter them beyond repair. At the very core of this entire ordeal lies a fundamental truth about human relationships. Fairness among children is the foundation of trust. A child's earliest understanding of justice is forged within the walls of their own home. And when parents tip those scales by taking money intended for one child's education to give to someone else, especially someone outside the family, it creates a deep, lingering feeling of betrayal. This specific type of betrayal cuts deeper than simple financial loss because it forces the child to realize that their safety and their future are viewed as expendable. When parents show blatant favoritism or a lack of transparency, the relationship with their children suffers long-term damage that cannot be smoothed over by forced holiday dinners or empty apologies. To fully understand the depth of this fracture, one must recognize that respect for a child's ownership and future is non-negotiable. College tuition funds are not just currency sitting idle in a bank ledger. They are your child's opportunity and future, acting as the very vehicle for their independence and upward mobility. Making changes to these vital resources without consent shows a blatant lack of respect for individual rights, which are highly valued and fiercely protected in American culture. By bypassing this consent, a parent communicates that the child's dreams are secondary and their boundaries are irrelevant. Furthermore, this dynamic introduces a painful lesson regarding external loyalties. Do not put outsiders above your children. Prioritizing your son's girlfriend over your own children sends a misleading message about family values, easily causing deep hurt and damaging relationships. It tells the scapegoated child that a stranger's temporary comfort is worth significantly more than their lifelong, silent loyalty. Yet, the fatal flaw in this toxic parental strategy is an arrogant miscalculation of strength. Parents must never underestimate their child's ability to defend themselves. The phrase, "you'll figure it out," is remarkably dismissive, weaponizing a competent child's own resilience against them. However, in reality, grown children can find formidable ways to protect their rights, including through legal means or by forging alliances with other relatives who see the truth. The scapegoat is often the strongest person in the room precisely because they have spent a lifetime learning how to survive without a safety net to catch them. The consequences of this parental underestimation are not merely emotional. They cross into the realm of severe, tangible penalties, as parents' actions can lead to legal consequences. Misuse of money belonging to children, especially if it is tied to an irrevocable trust fund, can lead to fierce disputes or devastating financial interference. This serves as a stark, unforgiving reminder of the legal responsibility inherent in managing children's assets, proving that biological ties do not grant immunity from the justice system. To avoid such catastrophic outcomes, transparency in family finances is essential. In the U.S., personal finances are expected to be very clear, and parents need to establish firm boundaries, proper documentation, and clear communication to avoid misunderstandings or conflicts. The rule is simple: communicate instead of imposing. If there are legitimate financial difficulties or special reasons for reallocating resources, parents need to discuss them openly because unilateral decisions often lead to negative, explosive reactions. When communication fails and unilateral theft takes its place, the fallout is rarely contained behind closed doors, meaning family honor and reputation can be deeply affected. The narrative clearly shows that when conflict escalates, particularly a conflict involving a parent's betrayal, the undeniable truth can spread rapidly and affect the entire family, exposing the rot hiding behind a perfect suburban exterior. In their desperate attempt to shield a favored son from the realities of adulthood, the parents destroyed their own legacy. This highlights a critical parenting distinction. Teaching children independence doesn't mean neglecting them. Encouraging children to be self-reliant is a noble and necessary goal, but it shouldn't ever be done by depriving them of their legitimate resources. True independence is nurtured through structured support, not manufactured through deliberate sabotage. Ultimately, the most enduring and tragic lesson of all is that trust, once lost, is incredibly difficult to restore. Wrong actions in major, life-altering issues like education and money can cause children to become permanently distant, severing the emotional umbilical cord for good. Overall, this story reflects a core value in American society: the profound respect for individuals, undeniable fairness, and clear responsibility within the family, especially when it comes to finances and the future of children. If you have navigated the treacherous waters of being the capable but overlooked child, thank you for listening to Sophia Told Stories. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your own experiences in the comments below, because your voice and your resilience truly matter here. We spend so much of our youth waiting for the people who raised us to finally recognize our worth, twisting ourselves into smaller, quieter shapes, just to fit at a table where the chairs were never meant for us. But perhaps the true tragedy isn't that they failed to choose you. Perhaps it is the years you spent believing you still needed their permission to walk away.